Greetings and welcome from me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today, in the latest of my deep dive videos, I'm going to explore the retrograde of Venus through the sign of Leo, which begins on the 23rd of July and goes on through to the 4th of September. That's 44 days. This event hasn't happened for 8 years. What can we learn from what happened then? I will be sharing that with you. Also, what are the themes of Venus? And what can we expect with Venus in Leo and then in this retrograde? Also, was there a post and will there be a post-shadow retrograde period? Well, the answer is yes. So I'll share the dates and perspectives around that. But also, what can we expect in terms of our personal situations? There's going to be a lot of re-evaluation going on, whether it's around relationships or money. But also there are other areas that I would like to share with you. Then the event chart. So when this begins, we get a snapshot of the influence that we can expect from all the other planetary influences feeding in. Now there are 3 mighty oppositions that forge a backdrop to this. Mars in opposition with Saturn, the Sun in opposition with Pluto, the Moon in opposition with Neptune, and also Venus itself is clashing with Uranus and also with Pluto. So it's going to be very powerful. And how can we relate to it in terms of us all together? So that's the event chart from a solar perspective. I'm then going to go on to share with you each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces and give you a taste of what to expect over this period of time from the perspective of your sun or your ascendant. If you're new to my channel, thank you so much for joining us. This is very much a community. If you have any thoughts, please do share your comments. I do try to interact with as many as possible. If you're a returning visitor, thank you so much for joining me once more. If you've yet to subscribe, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Now, I'd just like to share with you a very special opportunity. Year 2023 is speeding by and year 2024 is racing towards us. If you order your personal horoscope forecast based on your unique birth data for year 2024 now, I will prepare for you the rest of year 2023 free of charge. Also, my special package, you'll get 30% off and your character analysis life roadmap report. This will give you searing insights into the patterns that have played out in your life so far and give you a much more intimate understanding of how to work with them. Please see the link beneath this video for more. So when Venus goes retrograde on the 23rd of July at 1:33 a.m. Universal Central Time, it's at 28 degrees and 36 minutes. And the significance of that is it means that it's in the last decan of the sign of Leo, which is governed, of course, by the Sun. So it has extra radiance. So Venus has been benefiting from that radiance, and that's absolutely glorious. But within the retrograde back to 12 degrees and 12 minutes by the 4th of September, it will still be influenced by that 3rd decan, which has a sub-rulership of Mars. And Mars, of course, is a much feistier influence. And in fact, at the start of July, the position of Mars and Venus were pretty close together. Now, Mars has now moved on into the much more practical sign of Virgo, but we started July with quite a passionate surge of energy. But this also coincided with the pre-shadow period, which began on June the 19th. So if you have felt some changes in your situation around relationships, around your financial situation, or around your own relationship with yourself in terms of what you want from relationships, from that time, it wouldn't be a surprise. Now, just to clarify, the post-retrograde period will conclude just 2 days before Venus makes its way into the sign of Virgo on the 7th of October. So this really is a big deal. So what are those Venusian themes? Well, of course, it's very much to do with relating through its rulership of Libra, and can be to do with love, romance, desire, but through its rulership of Taurus, it's very much more to do with self-worth, our values, sensuality, but critically, of course, money. And also between the two signs of Libra and Taurus, there is style, there's fashion, there's presentation, appearances, but also superficiality. Now, in the sign of Leo, Venus is a very proud occupant. Here, it likes to be really romantic. There is a desire for excitement because this is a fire sign, and a degree of drama and pizzazz. So big moments really brings Venus in Leo to life. Can also be very kindly and warm-hearted, particularly to good causes. But people with Venus in Leo can have quite the appreciation of status, and that's where the superficiality of Venus, particularly in its retrograde, can come in. So they have a great need to be admired, adored, and also have some kind of status in some kind of way, and therefore be seen with all the right people. And for people who are perhaps a little bit more spiritual or a little bit more earthy, that could be a little bit of a turn-off. But there's definitely a great appreciation of style and great taste, and this can be borne out in home furnishings or in the way people dress and present themselves. So that's Venus in Leo. So what happened the last time that Venus was in retrograde in this sign? It was from July the 25th through to September the 6th, and you'll know from that therefore it just nudged into the sign of Virgo too, but it was in 2015, and there was a retraction within the economy at that time. So the global economic conditions were weaker. There was a lot of demand was slackening off, but also we started to see quantitative easing being introduced more by governments, and of course interest rates since then until very recently have been historically incredibly low in order to try to stimulate growth. So one of the things that we've seen in the last year, of course, is the North Node and Uranus have been interacting with the eclipse series, but also the stern energies of Saturn, and particularly in terms of that November lunar eclipse in Taurus, which squared up with Saturn, but also connected with Uranus and the North Node. So we've seen a big reset going on, and then we have this Venus retrograde too. So a very interesting synergy there in terms of this new financial reality that's developing. But what can we expect personally over this 44-day period, and perhaps through to the end of that shadow period? Well, I think that we will go through a period of re-evaluation. I see Venus in Leo as having a lot of panache and being able to make some big statements, but also the fifth house, Leo, can be about risk, and Venus can be about money. So because Uranus, the planet of the unexpected, is squaring Venus, it's a little broad on this event, there could be a temptation to do something that's much more speculative, and that's something that I would really advise that you take a lot of care to really do your due diligence if you are thinking about starting a small enterprise or investing in something that's much more substantive. Now, this is probably not the best time to finally end a relationship, funnily enough, or perhaps even to start one. Or if one does start, maybe it will start a little bit slowly and tentatively, because if we end a relationship when Venus is in retrograde in Leo, I think what we may be doing is benchmarking a kind of idealism that we want from the relationship that's hard to get in probably most relationships. So our expectations can be inflated a little bit by the energy of Leo. Now, it is possible that some people, friends or past lovers, could come back into our thinking or back into our situations. But I have seen some astrologers name in their videos past love coming back into your life. Wow, it's a big claim. And if there is unfinished business in a relationship situation that was quite painful, that could raise people's expectations that this may happen. And I would say could is really the word. So we have to be very cautious. This is not me being negative. It's just being, I hope, grounded and sincere. Now, if you are someone who's considering having some work done, whether it's dental work in terms of improving your appearance, or maybe it's something of a cosmetic nature, I probably would delay that. Because of course Venus is about very much to do with beauty, but how we look. But also there could be some social events that may be delayed or cancelled, which could prove to be quite frustrating. And remember, Venus in Leo does have a downside, and that can be a little bit of vanity, arrogance, haughtiness, and being rather aloof. So someone that you may ordinarily get on well with or be drawn to because they have this charismatic vibration about them may seem much cooler and not be that much on form. But it's a wonderful time to get in touch with our inner relationship and to examine what we really want around those relationships. But I think thinking about those expectations, now we live in a world now where there's so much information that people can source to give them different perspectives. But certainly when I was born, it was very much of the age where, you know, boys were expected to perhaps be into sport and do these kind of rugged activities, and girls, women were expected to, you know, have this kind of princess sort of expectation. But those things can be quite deeply rooted into us, you know. And so whatever your reality is, if you do feel something coming up where there is that heightened expectation, particularly in an existing relationship, it's best to try to stay as grounded as possible. Now, I mentioned about speculation in terms of business ideas, but I probably would be very careful about major purchases. Now, because Venus likes posh in Leo, that could be some new home furnishings, could be an upgrade, it could be something that's a bit more physical, I feel, in a way. And it may be best to just think about that very carefully before really diving in. Now, if you do meet someone for the first time, this could be intriguing. Venus retrograde in the natal chart can often make people much less interested in monetary gain. And of course, it does depend on the zodiac sign it's in and what other planetary influences are applying to the position of Venus itself, and of course what house it's in. But I feel that Venus retrograde in the natal chart is also someone who can get married later. So they don't necessarily have a need to mix and mingle and have that kind of personal connection quite so early in the life journey. So it can happen when much more experienced, much more knowledgeable about how things work out. So that's really a little bit of a metaphor about how we can relate to this event. Now, I just wanted to share with you the event chart from a Placidus viewpoint. So we have got some really powerful oppositions going on. Now, Venus itself on this event, and I'm showing it on the screen with you now, is in house 4. House 4 is very much about where we live, who we live with, but also our need for peace, tranquility, and feeling that our inner world is really protected. But you can see that Venus is in a quincunx with Pluto in house 8. So in terms of Placidus, that's quite a complex relationship. I think Venus in Leo wants the best somehow in terms of protectiveness. So there could be a draw towards doing something more material around the home. But Pluto in the 8th house is asking us to be very aware of what the psychological dimension is of any relationship we're drawn to or any relationship we're in. When Venus and Pluto are in aspect, very often there is some kind of leverage. So for example, we can meet someone who seems to promise us something. Could be in a business context, or if you come and work with us, we'll make sure that your package is absolutely amazing, so much better than what you're on now. And then it could turn out that it isn't the reality, and that can be deeply disappointing. So unfortunately, because of the power potential and the secrecy of Pluto, people can get used. So because Venus is in house 4, which is very tender, be aware that nobody's using flattery, Leo, in order to get something from you. So whether that's sex or a monetary situation, just be conscious of that. Now, one of the interesting things about this event is the midpoint between the Sun, 2959 on the anaretic point in Cancer, and the Moon in Virgo is actually conjunct the position of Venus. So the Leonian energy of this event is amplified. And we can see that the standout positive feature of this chart is the position of the North Node and the Pater Fortune, which are forging a perfect trine with Venus. So they're in house 11, very much about friendship. If we've got very sincere friendships, this could be a time to draw closer to people, because rather than thinking about who might be the most fun to be with or who might be a good laugh, we're actually thinking about who are the people who are much more sustained in our situations. You know, they're solid citizens that are very reliable. So there could be some lovely connections that go on, and in quite a spiritual way. So if we're connected to someone through a philosophy or just in an instinctive way, because of the North Node being in Aries, instinct, that can work well over the next few weeks. But you can see the Sun is in house 2, everyday money, and is in an opposition with Pluto in house 8, longer term money. So Venus in house 4 could be, I feel, to do with the property market. It is broadly in an opposition with Saturn. I don't usually use up to 8 degrees. You can see actually that Mars is directly in an opposition with Saturn, and Mars is in 4 and Saturn 10. I think frustration, limitation, and perhaps a real slowing down in the housing sector, which has been presenting itself for some while, because, you know, putting up rents and mortgage rates is going to slow demand down eventually, and it's not sustainable. So I feel that those crunch oppositions, Saturn, Mars, Venus, Saturn broadly, the Sun opposite Pluto, powerful exchanges. So because Venus can be about love, desire, and can also be about lust, of course, just be aware with Pluto applying to Venus in the quincunx, but also to the Sun, again, there could be someone who cultivates goodwill through perhaps saying all the right things when it comes to our emotional identity or relating into us, but we need to understand people's motives, but also our own. The last opposition I want to share with you is between Neptune and the Moon. Now the Moon is in house 5, very Leonian, but it's in the very practical Virgo. But when Neptune applies to the Moon, we just really can get confusion, and also the potential for deceit. So if you're in a relationship situation where it's very hard to know where you stand, there is a lot of power politics, you feel there's a lot of leverage, maybe it's very sexual, or maybe it's based on admiring someone because they're well off or have a nice car, just be aware that we need to dissipate all of this and get down to what's crucially important, which is the spiritual dimension. And actually, because Uranus squares up with both Mercury and Venus in Leo, that can make us a bit more impulsive, but Uranus is in house 12. Some secrets could be revealed around, maybe someone we're interested in, maybe we're going to hear something from a friend, maybe there's something on social media we're going to pick up. So if there is a relationship situation you're unsure of, there's a lot of potential for politics, quite honestly. Now, let's just look at the solar chart. So if you're not so far along your astrological journey, this starts off at the vernal point, 0 degrees Aries for the first house. And you can see, therefore, that Venus is in house 5. So very much about romance, playfulness and sociability. So those areas for sure can slow down. But you can still see the same set of influences go on. It's just that Saturn moves to house 12, as does Neptune. So that potential for insincerity is increased. But I want to really stress the positive of Venus retrograde in Leo, because Venus in Leo can inflame our expectations. It can be very showy. It can be very spectacular. And the slowing down is asking us to reassess those expectations, as I mentioned before, but also get more in touch with what we really want. I think it's important in any kind of relationship, whether it's business, a personal friendship, a family tie, or our love life, to understand where we're coming from really clearly. And then we can set out our position in a way that other people can be clear about too. So we don't really know exactly where we stand because someone's maybe bewitching us in some way or another. We feel a bit unsteady, swept off our feet in some kind of way. Venus is retrograde is asking us to slow down. If you're in a relationship which has been bumping along the bottom, this is a time when it will take a maximum amount of self-discipline and also putting one's ego to one side on both sides of the equation to try to talk things through. Remember, Leo is a fixed sign, doesn't like to let go and change things unnecessarily, but because Uranus is applying to Venus, there is a kind of push to change something. And maybe it is an element of the relationship that can be talked through. And if we can dispel that need to protect ourselves and seem that our situation is really reinforced, so we don't show any vulnerabilities, very Venus in Leo, daring not to in any way have any chink or vulnerability, that's not great if we're trying to solve something. So if you are in a time which is a bit more difficult, but you have invested a lot in it, you do care a lot for the other person, but it hasn't been easy, don't give up on it just because you read somewhere that this is a fine time to pack a relationship in. And when it comes to someone that you're separated from, that does mean a lot to you, don't automatically assume this relationship is going to come back into your life. So let's have a look at those Venus aspects. Now, there were some in June. Venus was opposite Pluto for the first 10 days of the month. Big politics, rather similar to the quincunx, a bit more obvious. Venus was also square Jupiter in week 2. That's coming back. And in July, Venus was square Uranus for the first 10 days. It was exact on the 2nd of July, and that's coming back into play as well. Now, as I mentioned before, the first 10 days of the month of July, Venus and Mars were quite close together. They weren't absolutely conjunct, but that did bring a real sort of drama and pizzazz. So there may have been some exciting developments for some lucky people around that time. But in August, the key date, without any question at all, is the Cazimi on the 13th. Venus is actually conjunct in modern astrology from the 11th to the 14th within 3 degrees, but exactly together. Venus, because it's retrograde at this sign, means that it's this side of the Sun. So it's an inferior conjunction, Cazimi, in traditional astrology. And that means the potency of Venus is amped up by the radiance of the Sun. So that could be a very important event. You know, even though we have the retrograde, it could be a defining moment around our social expression, our approach to our personal presentation, how we dress, but also, of course, around a love tie. Now, Venus is square Jupiter again from August the 17th to the 31st and exact on the 22nd. Now, Venus square Jupiter is one of those aspects, because it's a 90-degree angle and you'd think that would create tension. What this particular aspect can do is create a lot of desire. So we might find that our resistance is very low. So perhaps if someone from the past does show up and there's still quite a strong attraction there, it may be difficult to resist, or it may be our attraction to good food and good wine could see us rather going for it. But in September, Venus is still square Jupiter for the first 3 weeks, and it's exact on the 17th of September. Venus is square Uranus again, in the last week of September, but exact on the 29th. Now, Venus square Uranus is quite a turbulent influence, and of course it comes in on this event. It's not exact, but it is pretty close. So we get impulsiveness because Uranus likes to be free, and it also likes to do what it wants when it wants in an unfettered way, and Venus can be about desire. So it could be that we're splash out even though we know we're bending the plastic in order to do it, or maybe we're going to be very generous to someone that we really fancy, but whether it would turn out well is another matter. Or we could have a fling where it really goes at the speed of light and it's very mesmerizing, but whether it'll stick around is another matter. Of course, the retrograde itself ends on the 4th of September, but the post-retrograde shadow completes on the 7th of October before Venus makes its way into the sign of Virgo on the 9th of October and completes this cycle. Now, please stay with me as I go through each of those 12 signs. So for you, Aries, what I really love about this event is the position of the North Node conjunct the part of fortune in your sign, along with Chiron. And I just feel that if there is someone that you're really drawn to, and I don't necessarily mean just in a romantic context, your thinking around this type could be quite slow, but it could evolve in a way that actually does present an opportunity that could be longer lasting, because you might not be quite as impulsive about it. Now, of course, with Uranus squaring Venus, there is some potential to be a little bit more in the moment and a bit more hedonistic, which is the energy of Leo. But I feel that because of the role of Saturn in your 12th house along with Neptune, and because they're so impactful on this event, going across the heavens to the moon with Neptune and Mars with also in Virgo, your 6th and 12th houses are really coming or are sharply in focus. So although you have Mercury and Venus in the dramatic Leo for you, the sister fire sign, and that's, has potential, I feel there's a lot of other stuff going on that's actually making you think very carefully and, really be much more closely in touch with the emotional dimension and thinking also about practicalities. You may even feel quite, wary of presenting yourself in a situation where you feel that your emotions can get churned up. So in a way, the fact that this could go slower for you is rather counterintuitive for an Aries person who tends to live in the moment and just goes for it. And of course the North Node could be pushing you to do that in some ways. It depends where your own personal North Node is, of course. But instinctively, I just feel that this event gives you an opportunity to really understand the glory of what you really would like in terms of pleasures, in terms of the way you present yourself, in terms of your love life. It gives you a chance to really crystallize that. And because you can often be trusting, you can go into situations in a very wholehearted way. And I think that Saturn in the 12th house is asking you to pause, take a breath, not rush in. And the retrograde emphasizes that even more. So Taurus, for you, this event is particularly important because Venus is your ruler. And in the sign of Leo, it's very much about where you live. So very much in keeping with the natal chart, which has Venus in house 4. So your immediate environment, often very important to you. You take great pride in your home, whether it is in terms of growing your own vegetables, having house plants, or if you're someone who likes a little bit of sparkle and luxury and lush, often possible with Taurus people. These things are important because they give you your sense of tranquility. So tranquility is what Venus is asking you to think about over this next 44-day period, or even, to be honest, through to the end of the post-retrograde shadow, which takes you through to the 7th of October. Now, in terms of relationships, are you getting the nurture or are you giving the nurture to make the relationship, if you're in one, work as well as it could? that's the existential question that's being asked of you. Remember, energy comes from the heavens, but we can also project energy out from planetary influences. So I would say, for example, you could meet someone through your family who gives you food for thought. Maybe there's going to be a family reunion. Maybe someone you've been estranged from in your family is going to want to get in touch. And quite rightly, you might be thinking about what their motives are. And I think you'd be very wise to do so, because remember, Pluto is forging quite a tricky influence to Venus. And Pluto can be about desires, but also is retrograde, and for you it's in the 9th house, so you're really looking for the truth of what it really means. But balance in the 9th house, which is to do with expansion, to do with the more conservative 4th house, which is to do with stopping, pausing, resting, protecting, defending. You know, Venus here is needing to be soothed and smoothed. Talking of which, if you are someone who really does appreciate any kind of holistic medicines, I think some very, very nice massages, whether it's aromatherapy or whether it is something that's deep body massages, could be very healing. Get some of those toxins out of the body, get those lymph glands rinsed out. That could be a very good way to work with Venus retrograde. If you're someone who's very much into how you present yourself, whether it is your home or your personal self, I think the lesson of Venus retrograde here is don't let your outer shell really influence your inner relationship. So Venus is asking you to value yourself, even your vulnerabilities, because the 4th house is where we can feel very sensitive. So few ideas for you there, but a glorious opportunity when the Cazimi happens on the 13th of August. Perhaps you're going to invite someone round and spoil them with a lovely dinner. You can be a very skilled cook, and obviously you're like to be the best host possible, and you could do it with great style and panache, but it could be that someone will be won over because you have that appreciation of the homely and much more caring part of the relating way of being. It's not just about the more sexual and attractive side of relating. Gemini, for you, Venus is in house 3, which house 3 has an echo of your sign. It's quick, it's funny, it can pivot, it's flexing, it's can use oodles of charm, and you have all of that in your toolbox anyway. What Venus retrograde is asking you to do is to consider the use of language, whether it's through social media, whether it's through text messages or emails, or through direct interaction, because the 3rd house and the echo of your sign can be so quick moving. It can at times, because of the mutability of Mercury, your ruler, it can seem to some people that you are a different being to different people. And I don't actually think that you would argue that you can be like that at times. So what Venus retrograde in Leo is asking you to do, particularly with your ruler Mercury being conflicted by Uranus in your personal solar 12th house, is to try to be as sincere as possible. Measure the sharing of the language you use, the tone you use. Articulate your message with a great deal of delicacy, and you can gain hugely from this transition because you can rethink your ideas and beliefs around how you relate to others. Or you could see this as an opportunity to be wonderfully frivolous. But as I say, Mercury square with Uranus, and obviously Uranus squares with Venus too, but it's broader, is almost exact. So I feel that some stuff can come into the open, and it could be that some people will have observations about the way you are that you could find challenging. It may be people in your community, it could be a neighbour, could be a sibling, will say something. It may not necessarily be sinister, but they may say something that you find gets under your skin a little bit, particularly with Pluto in house 8, very psychological. So what seems to be a bit of fun and banter maybe you could feel that someone is propelling quite a direct message to you, and you could feel that that's unfair or unkind. But equally, someone can feel that you're doing that to them, using your wit and charm to mask and conceal a point that you're trying to leverage to them. So it's all about communication, and it's all about asking yourself how your communication is working, and is that communication matching your emotion, or is it working at a more superficial level? I think that's really how I see this event for you. So Cancer, for you, Venus has a kind of Tauran feel in its retrograde because it's in house 2, so very much in keeping with the foundations of your world, how much money you have, but also how you value yourself. If you're someone who does feel a little bit more insecure when your finances are stretched, totally understandable, this could have quite an impact on you, in the sense that if you don't have quite as much money coming in, or more money's gone out because of the cost of living increases, that can create a greater sense of insecurity. So what Venus retrograde is asking you to is go beyond the financial domain and actually think about the spiritual domain of your true self-worth. So you may need to sort of work with yourself a little bit. Also, Venus in the second house can see us really tempted by anything remotely gooey and calorific. So if you're someone like me, Libra and ascendant, who's got a sweet tooth, but you've been on a diet, you could find yourself wavering a little bit, just being really truthful. But equally, this could be a time when you can get into the earthier dimension of Venus through its rulership of Taurus, and actually enjoy growing some vegetables. You know, you could get one of those grow bags. I don't think it's too late in the northern hemisphere to do a little bit of growing, or perhaps get some local vegetables or some organic vegetables to get in touch with that more earthy side of the influence of Taurus that comes through its ruler of Venus. So certainly don't value yourself by how much money you have behind you at the moment. I'd like to think that since Venus has been in Leo, and especially when it was quite close to Mars, you did have some kind of uplift. Some kind of serendipitous event occurred which has pleased you. Now Leo, Venus being in your sign, obviously is emphasizing your gorgeousness. And having had Mars there as well recently, wow. So you no doubt have been strutting your stuff. If there's more than one person who's been hovering around you recently, it would be of absolutely no surprise. In fact, it could be several people who've been showing an interest, which could be really gratifying. But the first house is very much about our personal identity, and if you feel that you're not getting the attention, particularly in an existing relationship, or people don't really understand that there's talents and skills and artistry that you possess that they don't really tune into as much as you would like, I think this retrograde can give you the opportunity to really stay with it. You know, don't necessarily demand the attention. You obviously like to be respected at the very least. And I think if you think in terms of the respect scale, on the scale of being adored, all the way around to be respected, I like respected for you because I think it's more sustainable, and I think it gets you a bit earthier, which is the Taurian influence of Venus. Now, the presentational side of Venus is how you look, you know, your dress sense, the more cosmetic side of life, that comes through Libra. And maybe you are going to give yourself some kind of makeover or new look, and actually perhaps you're going to give this an awful lot of thought. But it may be that if you're looking for some kind of outlet for your talents, with Mercury quite close to Venus, you definitely can still articulate the message. You just need to make sure that the message is in touch with what's really good to what you're drawing to you, you're attracting to you. So Venus in retrograde in your sign is about attraction. What are you wanting to attract to yourself, and is it the right things that you're attracting to yourself? So if you are thinking about that makeover in some way, or you're thinking about a relationship, think not just about what you're going to draw to yourself, but also think about what the other person will want from you. Now, Virgo, I've been saying to you for some while that this could be a summer that challenges your relationship sector because of the activity in house 12, which can be about deep reflection, but also about understanding who may not have our best interests at heart, secret enemies. But also it can be the time of endings, and then of course you have Saturn, the planet of limitation, in your sector of relating, and that's in direct conflict with Mars in your sign, which is flagging up your need to be an individual. So I think of all the signs, this event could test the validity of a relationship to the maximum, and that stress test may be something that could be uncomfortable to go through, particularly with Uranus and Jupiter in house 9, about your personal individual freedom, but your desire for the truth. And that's coming into play with the positions, well, certainly Uranus of Mercury, your ruler, and also Venus in house 12. So really this is a time of big thinking. You know, if you are in a relationship where you don't feel the other person's devoted, dedicated, sincere, you really have to listen to that, because the planets are urging you, particularly with Pluto in the 5th house of romance, urging you to not let things drift on a situation that just is never going to work out. So you may need to show the maximum amount of executive decision making of all the zodiac signs, because although Venus retrograde for many people is not necessarily the time to leave a relationship, I feel it could be a time that you personally consider it if you're not happy. But what about if you're single? What does this mean for that? Well, I think essentially you could be thinking about that person from the past, but don't forget why it didn't work out last time. And unless both of your situations have changed, or you've both had enough time to work through things and really sort of reach a new accord, it probably is a little bit of a risk, to be honest. It's not to say it's impossible, but as I've mentioned before, when some astrologers say this is a time when relationships, past lovers can come back into your life, well, that might be so, but will it be in a way that's good for you? So just be aware that your chart is very psychological, and it needs a maximum amount of trust and constructiveness. You don't need games. I think that's really what is going on for you. You need to know where you stand in a straightforward way, and if you don't, this could be a time when things break down. And of course the other part of it is we can't control what anyone else does in terms of their attitudes towards us. So someone could draw away from you, even if that's something that you're not particularly wanting. So just be conscious of those three different dimensions. So Libra, Venus retrograde occurs in your sector of friendship. One of the things that, in terms of expectations, that seems to be predicated these days is that everything has to be absolutely at maximum, almost perfect. And I think what Venus in retrograde in the 11th house is saying, sometimes it's really good to celebrate things not that are different between us and others, but the things that we do share in common. And it's easy to get caught up on what's wrong. And because Mars is in your 12th house at the moment, and that can be about betrayals, or it can be about you feeling dissatisfied and not feeling there's a future, the 11th house, Leo, in a relationship, and also the moon being in the 12th house, that could see you feeling a bit uncertain about how the other person feels, especially in its opposition to Neptune. So those two oppositions between the moon and Neptune and Mars and Saturn really could see you think quite critically about a relationship at the moment. So what Venus retrograde is saying, don't forget the bits that work well. But that doesn't mean to say that you should necessarily set your standards too low in order just to maintain the status quo. And obviously when you're unhappy, I get it as well with my Libra and ascendant, I can't make my mind up. But when I'm in good form, I can be extremely decisive. but when I'm not in good form, I can't make my mind up. So if you're in a relationship situation, this is a classic Libra characteristic where you can't make your mind up. I feel that those two oppositions could make you think very seriously. And then there's the third opposition between the Sun and Pluto going across your need to be in charge of your life, the Sun, the 10th house, and Pluto being in the part of your situation to do with your emotional security. So, and potentially being fearful of change, which is entirely understandable human emotion. So what I would say is, do celebrate the things you have in common, but do understand that at the moment you could look at your relationship situation, whether you're with someone or not, as a glass that's half empty. But if you are single and you'd like to meet someone, I think the Venus retrograde is asking you to rethink your social interactions, particularly if you're someone who is a little shy or reserved, or your circumstances through children or work or health make it more difficult to connect with people. Do think carefully about how you could change that somewhat within your circumstances to achieve a greater connection. And that Cazimi, which occurs on the 13th of August, could see something significant happening. But the 11th house is about feeling that something has got a future, it can go somewhere. The direction of travel is something that, despite some bits that might not be perfect, you can sort of feel, look, this person's in for the longer haul with me. And if that's the case, you could get through this period, even if you are feeling a bit dissatisfied. If you don't see yourself being with this person that you're with at the moment, future forwards, that gives you a big decision to make. And that's down to perhaps not necessarily wanting to rock the boat or thinking about what you do get from it, being more concerned with how it would be without it, that kind of stuff, which all clouds the matter. So a bit difficult really in a way with those oppositions, because it could see you pulled in different directions, and it makes it more difficult to flow in one way, in a joined up sense towards what's really truly right for you. But if you're single, do try to think about how you can connect better to others. So Scorpio, Venus for you goes into retrograde in house 10. This is very much to do with ambitions, goals, can be to do with our career, our professional connections. And Venus has given you an opportunity, along with your ruler Mars, your traditional ruler, recently, in order to build up your contacts and raise your profile, particularly if you're a creative. You have a lot of flair and you want to, or have been showcasing your talents. So it's possible that things could slow down, or it seems they slow down during this retrograde in terms of those professional alliances. And also because your modern ruler Pluto is applying to the position of Venus in your third house of how you think, your beliefs and how you communicate. You don't want to be seen by someone in a position of influence as almost like using charm and diplomacy in order to get something from the situation as much as give something to the situation. So a little bit of care is needed to be seen as being sincere. Now, because your traditional ruler Mars is also checked by Saturn in the 5th house of your desire to have fun, Saturn in the 5th house is usually a bit of a challenge. You have to work at demonstrating our talents, but Mars in the 11th house is where you want to be heading, and so that can slow things down. Then Pluto, your modern ruler, is applying to the position of the Sun, so conversations can feel highly charged. So this is a time for maximum patience. Now yours is a fixed sign, so you're used to things evolving rather than necessarily happening at the speed of light. But I feel that because you have that wisdom to see what goes on beneath the surface, you can handle this influence. It's just being aware that your impatience, particularly with Uranus applying to both Venus and Mercury, around a situation could see you try to push it or force it, when it's better to just let it find its own way. And this is where your innate wisdom about life and reading situations and understanding people, the politics of situations, can really help you. So patience is going to be very important. It doesn't mean to say you shouldn't continue to use a degree of good grace and good manners in order to build up your alliances, but just be aware of how it can be seen. Romance. Well, the 10th house can be things to do with property or having a traditional connection with someone, for example, getting spliced. So if that is where you want to go with an existing relationship, it just may feel, again, like it's not going there as quickly as you want. Doesn't mean to say it won't get there in the end. So Sagittarius, Venus being in house 9, in your sister fire sign of Leo, has given you a real taste recently for perhaps some drama and excitement, adventurism, or has it? Because of the role of Saturn. So since March the 7th, there has been a different kind of energy that's come in. Also, Neptune's been there in a very swirling, misty and sometimes confusing way since 2012. So your emotional situation has been moderating another part of your nature, which is very free-spirited. So although Venus and before Mars were pushing you, particularly more recently, to do something more daring and to break out, it may have been more difficult to do, because I feel that Saturn is trying to, in some ways, instill in you that there are benefits to a degree of stability, family life, not necessarily even in a traditional construct, but just some kind of a pattern to your emotional way of being that has had to live or coexist with Venus's desire to, to be more expansive. But there's another way of looking at this. If you feel free in a relationship, but you don't have much space, it's because the person you're with or the way that you feel with them is not taking away that part of you that does feel that you can make your own decisions. So in other words, you're in a very good relationship. But if you're in a relationship which feels all about the Saturn stuff, it's all about, applying yourself and being very invested to, getting things straight around the home base, but there isn't much fun or frivolity or variety or spontaneity, that's going to be tested over the next few weeks. But the other way to look at Venus retrograde is just about the word truth. You have an appreciation of knowledge. You'd argue that everyone has their own right to their own reality. I can't argue with that. So you may find out what the reality is of your relationship situation at the moment, or even to do with your financial situation. But I think Saturn in that 4th house, going across the heavens to Mars in your 10th house of ambitions, whatever you want, it ain't necessarily going to happen at quite the pace you want. The confusion that the moon opposite Neptune can create, your feelings are going to be close to the surface as this event comes to its point of climax, if you like. So part of you, that old part of you that needed to wander and do what you wanted when you wanted, that could come up during this retrograde, but I feel it is going to be challenged by the position of Pluto, 2nd house, everyday money, foundations, and Saturn in your 4th house of home and emotion. So yeah, I feel that you could find yourself feeling a bit restless. If you are penned in, maybe you will look to escape. But if you're in a relationship where you don't feel throttled in any way, you don't feel that you're losing your agency, as they say these days, I think it's because you're in a very good relationship, even if it does have its own challenges. So it's all down to your reality, this transition, but maybe some rethinking about what you need in terms of, maybe your own interests, maybe going off with some friends, maybe a little breakout. But if you're essentially in some kind of construct where you live that works for you, don't throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater. So Capricorn, for you, Venus in the 8th house is a really mystical location for Venus to be. Venus is about desire, can be about loot. The 8th house can be about long-term loot. So the 8th house can be about legacies. Venus can be about affections, money. So maybe something to do with a financial situation will need to go through a period of big review. For example, if you have a business and you've had this business for some while, but the world's changing, you're not sure if the business is attuned into it, you could think about new income streams with this retrograde. In a romantic situation, if because of your practical nature and your appreciation of security, you're in a relationship which has all the material stability that's very, very important, but does lack that spark and sometimes unpredictability, which makes our pulse race, I think Venus's retrograde could see you review and think about the whole concept of intimacy. You know, are you with somebody where basically you're coexisting as an alliance as friends, which there's nothing wrong with that, but is it meeting all your needs? I'm not telling you that that's the case. Venus retrograde will ask you the question, or you can ask Venus retrograde the question yourself. If you're single and there is someone that you're drawn to, and it is, you know, clear to you that there is quite a thread of desire in it, that could make that person much more intriguing at this time. But that then brings in your natural wisdom. You're not necessarily just going to get swept away because you fancy someone. It needs to be workable as well. So what Venus retrograde is going to do is not provide a complete solution to any of your scenarios. It's just going to give you more information to review where you are and perhaps understand more deeply your needs or how you can plan things going forwards. But I think Venus retrograde could bring some kind of return on an investment that you've made some while ago, particularly to do with a pension. Maybe some kind of inheritance or legacy could come to you through this retrograde season, or maybe you can put in place provisions for when maybe someone else can benefit from your situation, just being really honest. It's a very sensitive subject, I appreciate that, but maybe some contingencies can be wired in, thinking about what the situation would be for those that you're close to. So some rethinking about resources, rethinking about intimacy. If you're in a very safe relationship, you could wonder, do you need some more excitement? The 8th house can be about transitions, it can be about ends, but it can be about rebirth. So this could be a time that you could rebirth something through some very intense dialogue, thinking, even therapy. 8th house very much to do with transitions. So Aquarius, Venus going retrograde in your 7th house, is very much the Libran influence. It's about where we connect, this descendant, often underestimated, particularly by YouTube astrologers. It's all about the ascendant. So this is all about the descendant. So this is where we connect to people. So Venus going retrograde there, you could see that someone you've been drawn to recently does seem a little bit more unavailable or detached. Maybe you're going to want to just pull away a little bit. You have that in your nature. I know this. I've got Venus in Aquarius, along with the moon, the sun, Chiron. So having Mercury also in the 7th house is creating the ability to actually detach a little bit, but also discuss things and it be okay. But because your modern ruler Uranus is electrifying the position of Mercury particularly, and somewhat of Venus, there could still be some sudden discussions, and it may make it difficult to set your boundary. Perhaps also if you're someone who tends to be a people pleaser, you know, you're someone who goes out of your way to make sure that your mates are okay, or be very thoughtful to your partner. If you're not getting that back, that could be something that you become more conscious of during this period of time. If you're single, I feel that someone could start to evolve on your senses and be of great interest to you, Whether you'll decide to go forwards or not is another matter. Pluto in house 12 is in opposition with the Sun in 6. Maybe this is a time when you're trying to juggle some psychological stuff with the practicalities of life. And because of Saturn and Neptune in house 2, money, everyday money, competing with Mars and the Moon in house 8, the longer term situation and where you'd be prepared to share and be more invested. So there is some inhibition around this event. And of course, Pluto is also in a quincunx with Venus as well. So on that point, I would say that whatever your romantic status, it is really important to understand the psychological framework of the connection you have with the person in your life or who you'd like in your life. So do see beneath the surface. Venus Libra and energy can be a little bit superficial, unfortunately, and can Leo energy be a little bit superficial. If you're attracted to someone who's never going to get your depth, unfortunately this transition may reinforce that, but at least it'll make it clear to you that don't waste your time on a situation where you're never going to get that mutual respect that is so important to Aquarius people. And if also someone's in some way dissing you because you're a little different or zany, don't take that stuff, because Venus in Leo can be maddeningly sort of like, well, this is the way it is, you know, it can be very, very snobby. So just watch out for that. Pisces, for you, Venus goes retrograde in the part of your situation to do with the 6th house, which is where we can be sacrificing and good natured to do the small but important thoughtful gestures that actually makes relationships really come to life. So if you're someone who tends to do the major part of the domestic chores in a relationship and you feel your partner takes you for granted, I think this is going to be a time when you withdraw services to some degree. You're going to make it clear, even if you're diplomatic, that they need to do more. Because Uranus is connecting to Mercury in the 6th house, an electric energy will make it difficult for you not to speak your truth. Certainly, don't continue to be too giving to a situation which you don't get much back from. Now, of course, Saturn's in your sign. There's not a lot of physical vitality for the early born Pisceans at the moment. And even though Mars is in opposition in your 7th house of relating, having Saturn there is very inhibiting. The 6th house could also have a tendency, especially with Mercury really, to kind of think about what's not quite ever going to work with it. But I wouldn't kill off the potential for a relationship just because the circumstances aren't exactly so. You know, for example, someone may not live around the corner. Perhaps they've got children. Perhaps they've not got quite the availability you want. If the chemistry is right, you can get over those things and reach a way through. Maybe not exactly as you would like, but certainly if you have a connection with someone that's really meaningful, it's better than having no connection with someone just because your diary's clear and it doesn't put us out a little bit. So sometimes we have to flex and bend a little bit. Fortunately, because you're a mutable sign, you understand flexing probably more than any other zodiac sign. And of course, you can be very, very giving. But it's not always good to be giving if you're not getting. So find that tipping point. Mars is asking you, along with the Moon, to state your case, to present your boundaries and not be too eager to do everything to please someone else. If you're single, don't be surprised if someone you work with or encounter in an incredibly ordinary situation takes your fancy over the next 44 days. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you really enjoyed that video. And if you would be so good to subscribe, comment, like or share, I'd be really obliged.